every empire burns. The question isn't when the flames arrive, it's what rises when the ashes fall. For us today, amid inflation, division, and disasters, that question no longer belongs to the past. July 8064. The heart of the world, Rome, beats under a dry sky that refuses even a drop of rain. A city of marble, power, and pride. A living body breathing through narrow alleys, timbered roofs, and 1,000 small hearths that feed an empire. They say all roads lead to Rome. That night, every road was driven back by hot winds toward a single point of disaster. Not an invading army, not a revolt. Just one tiny heat source small enough to ignore, yet enough to expose how fragile the whole design really was. Fire doesn't only consume wood and stone, it exposes what Rome tried to hide: power and its price, guilt and the excuses for it, faith and the way it's tested. This is not just the story of one night when a city's safety limits were breached. It's the story of what burned inside an empire and a mirror for every modern nation facing crisis: economic, moral, and communal trust. It's about how one city died and how another, colder and stronger, rose from the dust. If history were only numbers, you'd click away right now. But if you live in a country still arguing about debt, infrastructure, migration, and religious freedom, you'll want to stay. Tonight, Rome isn't writing figures. It's carving its fractures back onto the map. Stay with me. Before this night ends, Rome will collapse, and from its ashes, something new will rise. What emerges will determine more than a city's fate. It will echo across the entire history of the Roman Empire, including ours, as we search for answers in 21st century America. Before it burned, Rome was the center of the world, a place where every road, every caravan, and every ambition converged. From dawn, the city sang its own music, street vendors shouting, wagon wheels grinding over stone, blacksmiths hammering iron, a symphony of power and prosperity. Nearly 1 million souls lived here, slaves and merchants, soldiers and nobles, priests and beggars. Markets overflowed, the smell of fresh bread mixed with salted fish, tanned leather, and olive oil smoke. It was a city that never slept, an empire in motion, powered by 1,000 human hands. But beneath the brilliance hid a dangerous design no one dared to notice. Wooden high-rises called insulae stood packed wall to wall, streets so narrow that rooftops nearly touched. One spark could turn the whole block into a single chain of heat. Below, the shop fronts were crammed with fuel, oil, wine, fabrics, rope, everything flammable. Above, the poor crowded into stifling rooms where cooking fires in summer heat turned the air thick as a furnace. Meanwhile, the aristocrats on the Palatine Hill dined on silver plates and spoke of poetry and philosophy, rarely remembering that just a few streets below, others lived in homes ready to collapse at any moment. Rome in AD 64 was a proud giant, but one standing on dry sand. No one imagined that in just a few days, all that noise, all that splendor, would be swallowed by a single sound: the roar of fire. That night began like any other. No omens, no lightning, only the heavy, unmoving heat of a Roman summer. Along the long row of warehouses near the Circus Maximus, where grain, cloth, oil, and tar were stored, an oil lamp was left burning, or perhaps a careless hand slipped, and that was enough. At first, it was just a flicker, a breath of light. Then the flame found straw. It found fabric. It found oil. In seconds, the heat front expanded, hot air sweeping through the alleys, dragging each warehouse into a zone beyond ignition. In the blink of an eye, the fire became a wild animal. It lunged forward, devouring shop fronts, rooftops, and dry wooden doors. The wind blew steadily in one direction, forming a corridor of heat, a pattern firefighters would recognize across the entire history of the Roman Empire. With one sudden gust, the entire row crossed its flashpoint. A single explosion and the city woke. The first to hear it were the night guards. Then came the cries echoing through the streets. Fuoco! Fuoco! Fire! Fire! People poured into the alleys, barehanded, eyes burning with smoke. A mother clutching her child fought through a street glowing like a furnace. A merchant dragged his chest of ledgers to the doorway, then turned just in time to see the roof collapse in a burst of splintered wood. From the rooftops came howls of dogs, neighs of horses, screams folding into the hiss of wind and flame. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Others looted what they could in the chaos. Most simply ran, not knowing where to go. Buckets passed from hand to hand, but the little water they carried turned to vapor before it ever touched the flames. The vigil's Rome's firefighters swung iron hooks, tearing down houses to carve fire breaks. But as they pulled, the wind shifted and the fire leapt across streets faster than human hands could follow. From the Palatine Hill, the sky turned a deep red spectrum. Roof tiles rained down, and fine ash settled like falling mist. Then roofs caved in, one after another, like collapsing waves. There was no north or south anymore, only the direction of fire. Street by street, market by market, building by building, Rome's city of stone and power became a single living organism in flame. All that remained were sounds: the shriek of air, the crack of timbers, the cries for mercy, the sound of an empire gasping under the heat of itself. That night, Rome had only one heartbeat, the heartbeat of fire. On the first morning, people still believed the fire could be stopped. By nightfall, the city understood this was no isolated blaze. It was a full-scale urban collapse. The flames had left the Circus Maximus behind. They climbed the Palatine Hill, slithered through markets, and tore into homes along the banks of the Tiber. Each gust of wind leveled another street. Rome, divided into 14 regiones, was now turning to ash, one district after another. The fire spread along lines of fuel and density wherever wood was stored. Wherever oil was kept, those became highways of heat. From the city's heart, they said, you could see 14 pillars of smoke rising straight into the sky, each one a piece of Rome's soul burning. The firefighting cohorts, cohortes vigiles, fought like men against a monster. They tore down buildings to carve fire breaks, iron hooks clanging, wooden roofs collapsing, the crashes echoing like war drums. But the wind kept changing, the fire kept leaping, and every effort vanished into smoke. They threw water, sand, even dirt useless. For every cluster they contained, 3 more reignited downwind. Bodies of humans and animals lay tangled in the streets. Some ran, some fell, some collapsed from smoke. Families clung to each other, then scattered into chaos. Some sang in the inferno not from joy, but to drown their fear. Others stood silent, watching their homes burn, then disappeared into the roar of wind. Heat diffusion broke supply lines, matter crumbled, order disintegrated. Soldiers stopped following commands. The wealthy abandoned their treasures, the poor broke into granaries to eat. Sin and survival became the same word. Faith gave way to breath.
Faith gave way to breath.
Even the most devout Romans began to doubt. If the gods truly watched over them, why had they allowed their own city to turn to cinders? Day 3, the fire raged on. By the 4th day, smoke and ash had hidden the sun. Daylight dimmed, night glowed red, the sky scattering firelight through a haze of dust. They said the statues of gods on the Capitoline Hill gleamed red in the firelight, as if crying tears of molten blood. By the fifth day, thousands had fled beyond the city walls, setting up camps on the fields watching Rome burn, like watching a loved one die. By the sixth day, the fire slowed. Not because humanity had won, but because there was nothing left to burn. Rows of homes lay in gray, ruined roofs gone, columns broken, skeletons of charcoal standing in silence. People wandered through the wreckage, no longer sure where they were. Because the map of Rome, literal and moral, had been erased. And in that silence, amid the soft crackle of dying beams and falling ash, Rome heard a sound it had never known before. Not the roar of fire, but something deeper. In the pause between collapsing timbers, Rome heard the sound of its own heart break. When the last flames died, Rome was no longer Rome. The sky stayed gray, the ground stayed warm, and everywhere hung the sour smell of smoke water mixed with vinegar from firefighting and fine ash that clung to the lungs. Street vendors' calls fell silent. Only the shuffle of sandals scraped over cracked bricks. More than half the city had burned. 10 of the 14 regiones were badly damaged. Thousands were homeless. Tens of thousands had lost their livelihoods. Markets that once ranked among the busiest on earth were now piles of blackened charcoal and snapped wooden frames. Shops, taverns, bakeries, the daily breath of the city, had become ash and silence. Survivors pitched tents on the footprints of their former homes, under a sky where ash blurred the line between day and night. Endless lines formed for grain rations. Hungry children clung to their mothers' hands. Old men stared into the empty spaces where their roofs had been. No maps, no bearings, only memory. Then after the silence came the questions. Who did this? Why did the fire flare again after we thought it was out? Was it nature or a human hand? Rumors spread through crowds as fast as the wind that fed the blaze. Some swore they saw strangers with torches rekindling flames where they should have died. Some said those men were paid. Others said they sang among the embers, as if performing a ritual. The most exhausted simply muttered, "Fire doesn't find its own path. Someone led it." And so, on a city of ruins, pain hardened into a hunt for culprits. People didn't just try to survive, they began to look for someone to blame. In every disaster, people don't just look for survivors, they look for someone to blame. That was the moment when the ashes cooled and human hearts began to burn all over again. When the last smoke lifted from Rome's sky, people looked up and saw a familiar face return. Emperor Nero. He came back from the coast to a city charred black, where every street and building looked like the bones of an empire. The people wanted a strong hand, and Nero, at least in that moment, appeared to be the leader they needed, even if ancient sources disagree on how directly he commanded the relief effort. He opened the imperial granaries, sold grain at reduced prices, set up temporary shelters, and opened the imperial gardens to the displaced measures some sources record as real, practical help amid the chaos. He spoke of reconstruction, of a new Rome stronger, more beautiful, more durable. For a moment, people believed Nero could be a steady anchor, though the sources leave room for doubt about his motives and how long that resolve would last. A compassionate emperor, the one who would raise the city from ash. Then the whispers began. On the Oppian Hill, among the still warm debris, workers and imperial craftsmen started laying foundations for something larger than anything Rome had seen. Domus Aurea, the Golden House. Not merely a palace, but a private complex of unprecedented scale that split opinion, even then a symbol of aesthetic rebirth or of personal excess. Great halls stretching for hundreds of paces, vaulted ceilings gilded, walls inlaid with precious stone. At the center, an artificial lake the size of a neighborhood, often cited as proof of extravagance, though some read it as a bold aesthetic planning vision after an urban shock where sunlight played on a colossal statue bearing Nero's own face. People looked at one another and asked, was the emperor rebuilding Rome or rebuilding himself? That question survives because the ancient record preserves two portraits, a post-disaster reformer and a ruler lost in self-myth. While thousands slept among the ashes, their ruler dreamed of a city sheathed in gold, a new Rome, more splendid, but no longer a people's Rome. History paints Nero as many-sided, a performer, poet, and musician, and also in hostile accounts, a harsh ruler. Those sketches often came from political opponents, and bias is hard to separate from fact. He is remembered both as the man who helped Rome to its feet and as the man who exploited tragedy to polish his image and power, a charge echoed through the ages, though the sources never fully agree. Between the roles of benevolent king and self-enchanted tyrant, Nero moved as if acting in a play where the audience could no longer tell what was real. And in the sunset reflected on the man-made lake of the Domus Aurea, the chronicles diverge. Some say he was away when the flames rose and opened gardens and stores on his return. Even today, historians still debate whether Nero's targeting of the Christians was calculated politics or a story amplified by later tradition.